Welcome to the lecture for Unit 2 for ED 601. In this unit, you are reading about prenatal development and early infancy development and influences on that. It's a lot of reading, and I'm sure that you're familiar with much of the content, so skim it, and I hope you find a lot of it interesting and are also able to relate it to your work experience with older children. After completing the readings and listening to this overview, which highlights some of the main points in the readings, I hope you'll be more comfortable describing some of the biological and environmental influences on development before and after birth, and recognize how heredity and the environment can work together to influence development of complex traits that aren't necessarily determined by a specific gene or gene combination. You'll also be better able, I hope, to recognize newborn sensory capacities and reflexes and behaviors which are expected or typical during this age period, and also have an idea what to do if those don't develop in a normal way. I also hope that after doing these readings, you'll be able to describe a systems approach to understanding development and recognize how contexts and cultures can impact both how babies develop and how those around them interact with babies and are affected by having babies. As stated, a major goal of this set of readings is to understand how biology and the environment interact together to determine developmental outcomes, and the next slide illustrates some of those points. As I'm sure we're all familiar, we all have a genotype or genetic makeup that determines in part how we turn out or develop, if you will, and we also have a phenotype, which is basically how genetic material ends up manifesting itself, and people can have similar genetic makeups but have different phenotypes, and the environment is a large factor in determining how that phenotype actually ends up appearing. This slide lists some descriptions of the concepts in the readings from the internet that supplement our readings and basically describe the interactions between nature and nurture on development. I'll let you read them for yourselves, but they basically define the epigenetic framework, which looks at how genes express themselves and how they're influenced by the environment, and also the range of reaction, which is a construct or concept that basically suggests that our genes provide a range within which we can develop, say in intelligence. We can be so intelligent and maybe not less or more intelligent than that range determines. That's kind of a debated concept, but the idea is that our genes determine our potential and the environment can help maximize or hinder that. So if you could read these, and if you're interested, click to the links and get a little more information. That might help you understand the readings in Burke and get through them more quickly. In discussing the interaction between nature and nurture, Burke also discusses the construct of the genetic environmental correlation, which basically looks at how the genetic makeup of a person and their environment interact to result in the phenotype or developmental status of the person as they grow. This slide illustrates a little bit of information about that to supplement our text, and talks about how that genetic environmental correlation can be passive, evocative, or active. So if you would take the time to read through these, it might give you a better understanding of how people are influenced by the environment and also by their own genetic makeup, and how they also influence their environment and act upon it. So this gets at the idea of whether development is passive or active, which is one of the debates we'll conclude this lecture with. Another objective of the readings this week, which as I noted are a lot, is to recognize newborn sensory capacities and the milestones that they should typically be attaining. And by recognizing what's typical, parents, educators, doctors and so forth can recognize when there's a problem and a child might need intervention to help meet their milestones or succeed in their environment. So it's important to know what's normal, even though there is a range of normalcy, and not all children achieve all milestones at the same time. But certainly basic sensory capacities and behaviors can be common across most infants. So it's good to know what those are. Another objective of these readings, and which you'll encounter in basically all of our readings about the different age periods which are coming up, is to understand that development occurs within a system. And one theory that we talk about, which is the ecological systems theory, is something that we'll come back to over and over, which talks about how infants grow up in a context, whether it's social or a physical context, and things in that context or environment influence them, but they also influence their environment. So I want you to really understand and think about this idea that people develop within a system. And this even happens at the pre and perinatal stages. When it doesn't seem like infants have much power or influence over the world, things about them actually do bring out reactions and treatment of them that can impact how they turn out. So when you read the different theorists, you'll see the different areas where those changes can appear, whether they're in things like trust and emotional developmental areas, or whether they're in physical reactions or whatever it might be. But basically how we treat infants and how they cause us to treat them with their traits can impact their development and their preferences and their life. As I mentioned, and we've already read about, and we'll keep coming back to, Bronfenbrenner's model kind of is all-encompassing as far as systems theories go. And I like to use it as an example of the bidirectional influences on development, because it basically has the individual existing in the center of the system and being influenced by progressively less direct influences, but nonetheless powerful influences on him or her, and he or she is also influencing those influences. So it's that sounds convoluted and complicated, but this illustration here basically shows the general model and the systems or levels around people that influence them. This particular model doesn't talk about time, but there's a chronosystem too that looks at the time or epoch or era in which development's happening, and that can make a difference in outcomes as well. I'm going to leave you with this slide to go and contemplate your readings, but basically as you read, think about how these major debates in lifespan, I apologize, I got interrupted. Think about how the major debates in lifespan developmental psychology relate to even this early life period. And certainly the people around the infants are going through stages and influenced by these different influences on their development as well, and all that interacts and kind of yields the systems theory that we just saw the illustration of. Major debates to be thinking about in development, which apply to this age period and throughout the lifespan, are is development influenced more by nature or nurture? Does development follow one path or many? Is development continuous or discontinuous? And is development active, or do people play an active or passive role in their own development? Sorry, I'm tripping over my tongue here. I think that the second debate here really applies to the readings for this unit. Does development follow one path or many? Because while we may have common or particular genetic makeups, the outcomes can go in a bunch of different directions, and we can reach much higher or lower levels depending on the environment in which we find ourselves. So that kind of lends itself to supporting the idea that development follows many paths depending on our environment, which goes back to the first debate here, nature versus nurture. So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts about these debates, and particularly about this age period in our discussion forum. Thanks, and have a great week. Thanks for listening, and I will update the rest of the lectures soon. Thank you very much. Have a great day.